Satire is an age-old art form that combines fun and games and sharp criticism, dating all the way back to ancient Greek times. Although hard to define, satire aims to entertain and amuse while informing and reforming audiences. But what happens when an author's intentions are misguided and satire turns into something else entirely? This video essay is intended to break down the 2021 film Don't Look Up, based upon the thoughts and opinions of the film's creator, Adam McKay. This also serves to analyze how effectively those thoughts and opinions were conveyed in this visual medium. At first, Don't Look Up looks like satire, but I'd argue that it veers more into the field of propaganda. Let's get into it. The term propaganda is normally restricted to pieces of media made deliberately to influence audience opinions or to argue a point. In order to analyze works of propaganda, we must prepare to encounter ideas that are controversial. Instead of focusing on whether you agree or not with the message, focus on the way in which the message is conveyed and how we can interpret it as viewers. Don't Look Up, directed by Adam McKay and released on Netflix in December 2021, follows Kate Dibiasky and Dr. Randall Mindy, as the former discovered a comet larger than the one that killed the dinosaurs, and it's headed straight for Earth. The two go on and try to warn humanity of the oncoming disaster, but NASA, the White House, and the media all fail to accept it until, spoiler alert, the comet hits the Earth, and everything as we know it is destroyed. The film and its events serve as an allegory for climate change and the indifference towards the climate crisis seen from the government, celebrities, and mainstream media. The film received contradictory reviews, as some of the cast got a lot of praise, and the scientific references were factually correct, but McKay's attempt at satire was frowned upon. Some critics felt that it was deft and skillful, while others complained about its heavy-handedness. The film uses militant irony to portray a societal issue in an over-the-top way. I would argue that McKay misrepresented the climate crisis in this film. Misrepresentation refers to the identification of a real-life problem and its portrayal in an excessive fashion in hopes of critiquing the problem. In this case, McKay represents climate change with a comet. This is an inadequate metaphor because climate change is caused by man-made pollution, while a comet leaves mankind blameless. Therefore, this is a misrepresentation of climate change. In the film, the solution to the oncoming comet is to shoot a nuclear weapon into the sky. In contrast, in order to stop real-life climate change, we would have to drastically change our lifestyle and the way that corporations run. The comet isn't destroyed in this film because of the personal greed from politicians and public figures, while in real life, the lack of response to the climate crisis comes from a lack of political and personal will, and a reluctance on behalf of mankind. If humans hadn't caused the climate crisis, or if McKay chose a different catastrophe to compare it to, maybe the film would have been more successfully satirical. Unfortunately, the goal of McKay with this film was to appeal to a liberal audience who is already aware of and concerned about the climate crisis. The film paints the disaster as the fault of Republican politicians, reporters, and climate change naysayers, while failing to provide thought-provoking ideas or radical self-reflection. The criticism only flows in one direction, which leads me to classify the film as propaganda rather than satire. Instead of making insightful points and comparisons, the film just reinforces what the target demographic already knew. If anything, Don't Look Up plays the situation very safe, rather than creating a complex or provocative message. There are much better shows and films that handle satire well and provoke their audiences in a productive way, such as the HBO series Veep or the Stanley Kubrick film Dr. Strangelove. The film also poses the question of whether our culture has become too absurd and depressing to effectively satirize or not. All that being said, the film did manage to get a few things right. One is the way McKay pointed out how disingenuous the media industry is today. In one specific scene, it's pointed out by a main character how inappropriately friendly the news anchors are acting on screen. If you've watched any sort of cable news recently, or any news footage at all, that criticism is spot on. In another scene, there's a pop star who takes advantage of the situation in order to write a song and become more successful. Now, on the other hand, the acting in the film is great, with stars such as Jennifer Lawrence, Leonardo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, and Jonah Hill. The set design and camera work is all pretty good, albeit a little underwhelming. In conclusion, you can feel anxious about the climate crisis while still noticing the shortcomings of the film Don't Look Up as a satirical take on the issue. We all care, but McKay failed to point out how we all play a part in the issue. In order to make a good satirical film about climate change, instead of catering to your audience's beliefs, point out the flaws in your audience. That is the aim of satire. Based on these beliefs, I personally would categorize Don't Look Up as propagandist satire. My name is Taylor Phillips. Thank you so much for listening. This was for Hassan Pitt's media literacy class at UNCG. Thank you so much.